Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about creating compelling composition through lighting in Clip Studio Paint, presented by Lileti. Before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. The webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. There will be a question and answer session during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions in the GoToWebinar question box right away. Due to time constraints, not all the questions will be answered. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared on social media and will be sent via email to all registrants and attendees. The panelists for this webinar are Mari Quiñones, myself, and Lynn Sherford, also known as Lileti. For those of you who connect with us for the very first time or have never heard about Clip Studio Paint, Clip Studio Paint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more at clipstudio.net/and graphicsly.com. Also, we'd like to invite you to tag us in your Instagram stories. Tag us as #webinar at Lileti Art. Sorry about that typo. Graphicsly, welcome, and Clip Studio Paint. Lileti is a professional illustrator and concept artist born in Vietnam and currently resides in Oklahoma, USA. In spite of having a passion for art at a young age, she only found herself pursuing a career when she found a private mentorship in her own hometown for concept art in high school. A few years later, she set out of America for her gaming and animation degree. In 2019, she graduated with a Teens Award and started working for a small company of multiple AR and VR projects as an art director. She left the company at the end of 2020 and has been doing freelance since. Even though her skills range vastly from 2D art to 3D modeling and texturing, she always finds herself enjoying doing concept art, especially color keys and character creation. So with that, I will leave you with Lileti and her presentation, Creating Compelling Composition Through Lighting in Clip Studio Paint. Thank you so much.
All right, welcome everyone to the webinar. Thank you for joining me today for creating compelling composition through lighting in Clip Studio Paint. And I'm gonna jump right into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is finding references. It is really important for beginners, especially when you don't have much in your memory library yet. And so what kind of images you look for is important. You have photo references and illustrations. In my personal experience, both sources are valuable. Photos kind of just tell you how lighting work in real life, but the downside to it is sometimes they're very overwhelmed with details. And therefore, looking at illustrations, you will be able to look through the artist's lens and see how they render or simplify those details. Here is a photo study from Kranz Kush to pretty much illustrate my point. If you compare the details between the two, it's pretty much vastly different. You have different rays of light, you have different details, but overall, the structure is pretty much the same. But if you look into details like the window panels over here on the left is very much different on the right, where it's just like a black blob, and he didn't even really go into the detail on the faces because in a larger sense, it's not too important, but he also took his creative liberty to enhance the color and lighting to his own preference. And with that, I would say you should start to build a library. I think if you see something pretty and if it sparks joy and creativity from you, you should save it to your computer or pin it on a board on Pinterest. I still have photos from, I don't know, 5 years ago that still give me so much inspiration. And it is important to know that a lot of time, even when you have an idea in your head, having a reference will really help you flesh out that idea and also help you in the process of rendering. Okay, let's get to the more technical details, which is value, shapes, and composition. So there's a lot of stuff to break down here. Why is value important? To me, it's because it creates contrast, and by controlling the value, you can draw viewers' attention to the subject. This is a painting I did a couple of months ago. This is just to demonstrate you how lighting can really enhance your work. So on the left is like the before, and on the right is the after. And as you can see, on the left, you can still work out the character, but your eyes are immediately drawn to the foreground where the grass is. But with the lighting contrasting the character, your eyes are more drawn to the character itself, which is the purpose of the painting. When you talk about value, though, you usually think about this gray bar on the top left. However, that is such a wide range of value, and it can really get confusing at times. And when you get caught up in the details too early, it gets really hard to fix later on. And this applies to both portrait and character illustration environment, whichever you're working on. And so I would suggest using more limited amount of values. So if you can see, these are the studies, photo studies, and thumbnail sketches that I did a while ago using only, say, 3 to 4 values at a time, and that give me more room to think about the composition itself rather than the details. So I'm going to switch to Clip Studio Paint real quick just to give you a demo. Well, let's give you another example. This is another sketch that I did for this certain piece, as you can see on my social media. And this is pretty much how I started out. If you compare the two thumbnail sketches, they look really different. But if I just turn on this black layer to show you the grayscale, they are very similar in composition. And on the right, I know it's a little bit darker in value, and I make some changes and finalize it on the left thumbnail here. Overall, it is very similar in structure, and how I achieve the color is by using gradient map later on. So, okay, I'm gonna do a demo on this photo right here just to let you see how I sketch out my work from scratch. Usually what I would do is turn it back on grayscale. If it helps narrowing down the values, you can use this tool. Let me move this a little bit. Over here, go to filter, and I believe it's in effect, artistic, and you can just switch to color only. And I usually tone it down to about 7, and you can blend the color together. That will get rid of the detail. Color blur works similarly, but I wouldn't do that here. That's just to help you define the values if you are struggling at first. So let's see, start out with rectangle, fill that up with like a light gray, and I'm gonna go ahead and lock the transparency of this layer right there. And for sketching, I love using this lasso fill. I don't see this tool anywhere else really, except for Clip Studio Paint, like one app on iPad. But with this, I can block out pretty big shape. I'm not gonna go in too precise here. I'm just blocking out the composition, the main composition of the picture. Oops. And if you want to kind of refine it a little bit more, I would suggest using a hard pen, like a G pen here that I'm using to make a straight line. So if you press shift, that should just make a straight line for you. Right, let's go back to the lasso fill, and let's make this a little bit bigger. And yeah, I'm not gonna worry too much about the details here. He is a little bit bigger than the photo. you get the idea. Yeah, I probably should have put this on a different layer. That usually helps separate the shadow or the foreground from the background, I would say. But for demo purpose, this is okay as well. Let's put that. Yeah, and so in the process of studying a photo, if there's anything that you don't like, you can pretty much leave out. Like I'm gonna leave out the tree because it's sprouting from the guy's head, and I don't really think that helps the composition much. You can also use lasso tool to kind of draw, I guess, paint or fill little tiny windows in. So honestly, this is pretty close. Let's add some highlight. I wouldn't go all the way to white because that makes it hard to color later if you are using gradient map. If you're using gradient map and put it as white, sometimes it would just show as white if you're using a color blending mode. Okay. And if you want to change the value, just use color selection. So go to select color gamut, and I would put that at 5. That's my just preference. And select your value like that. You can press Control H and that will just be hidden. Use a soft brush and darken it. Maybe create more of a gradient. And that would work as well. All right, let me move on to the next part, is the lighting itself, the rendering of lighting. Sometimes I find it helpful to use blending modes. I use multiple and color dodge the most. Let me demo it down here. This is a sketch I did a while ago that's pretty mid-tone, no fancy lighting. So what you can do is put on a multiply layer. I would say pick a mid-tone-ish value to start. And then you can use hue saturation and change the luminosity to your liking. But this is good enough for me. Next, you create a glow dodge layer. I'm gonna use a warm-ish tone right here and airbrush it really lightly where you want the light to come from. And what I would do is to chisel the shadows out. So when you paint, sometimes I tell people you need to really think like a sculptor, not a painter, because these are 3D forms you're trying to insinuate into a 2D plane. You can also pretty much do it with 3D like this. And so let me turn that off. This is just a set that I set up with the 3D models from Clip Studio Paint. And the background is just a texture that I have originally. I put into perspective. But I pretty much used the same technique here where I put on a multiply layer and carve that rectangle out. And later on, I went in and chisel out the details. This is where you need to know a little bit more about 3D and volume. And with my background in 3D modeling, it really does help. And if you want a color gradient map, I'm not gonna go in too deep into this because today I'm just gonna talk about lighting. All right, let's move on to the next point, which is lighting and 3D volume, handling the details. Let's see. Right, first I want to talk about primitives. If you have been to our classes, this is what you draw the first day of class. It's primitives. It's boring, it's uninspiring, but later on in my art career, I realized how important this is because your brain somehow doesn't like complex shapes. And so it is crucial to be able to break down complex shapes into primitives like this. I'm gonna switch to Clip Studio Paint again. And so let me try and demo drawing a hand, which is something a lot of artists struggle with at the beginning. So how do you break down the hand? If you raise your hand up, your palm is kind of almost like a polygonal shape, right? It's not exactly a rectangle almost. It's a polygonal shape. In your thumb, there's this piece coming out that's like a triangular-ish shape. And then you have your thumb, which is 2 cylinders, and same with other fingers, just a bunch of cylinders. And so once you are able to break down complex shapes like this, it's really easy to figure out where the lighting should go. So if lighting is coming from there, you will know that, oh hey, light should hit this surface. For a cylinder, should be hitting this surface. And it would also hit all these surfaces, but in less intensity. Right? This is not a great rendering, but of course it's just to show you how to break down complex shapes and pretty much make it easier for your life. Next is ambient occlusion. So this is a term they use a lot in game and 3D modeling. You can look up the technical definitions by yourself, but to me, ambient occlusion is just where the light can't reach, where the shadow is the darkest, and it just disperses out throughout the object. And a lot of times lines can actually insinuate this absence of light. You don't need to paint in ambient occlusion and instead use line and line weight instead. And this picture is a great example to show like, oh hey, we have worked on the general value and lighting of the painting. When it comes to details, we just need to add shadows, and that's where details come in. And let's see, I also want to emphasize that lighting is not just directional light. There's also ambient light and bounce light. So that's the environment of the subject. Let me switch to this elf painting to show you what I mean. If you look closely, let me turn off a couple of layers. First, if you look at natural light or observe it, you will see that the sky is like a dome of blue light. And with that, with my subject in a natural setting, I usually add like a blue hue from like hitting the top surface of the character. And here I use a normal layer, but you can use overlay. That's another layer I like to use. And with bounce light, is the light coming from the bottom. When sunlight, put another layer on top here. When sunlight hit the ground, it bounced back up, right? Light bounces everywhere, but for the simplicity of it, I would say the light bounced back into the character, and what you have is this warm yellow hue that's facing the bottom surface of the character or the object. And if it's not always yellow like this, so whatever light, whatever color is the ground, so if the grass here is green, the color showing on the character here would be green. All right. The next thing I feel like it's important to talk about is material of the object. This is, I think, one of the most challenging thing as an artist I have to understand, because once you understand how shadow and light work in simple primitives, this is the next step up, because different material reflect light differently. So these are also primitives, right? But they show off different light and colors. And if you know 3D, the technical terms of it, there are roughness, glossiness, that determines how the light affect the object. So if I blur this surface out a little bit and make it a little bit more rough. Oh, wrong one. You would see what I mean. So usually if it's a rougher shape, imagine your objects have little tiny bumps that disperse light. And if your material is glossy and metallic, it mirrors the light better. So if it bounces towards the object, it basically just bounces back. But if your material is rougher, your light bounces in more directions. And so here, if I want to make this ball smooth, not smooth, more roughness, I would need to smooth it out because the light is dispersed through this object. Right. Okay. Let's switch back to the slides. Oop, sorry about that. And after you learn all the rules, you can start breaking them. Us as artists, I believe that you don't have to reflect reality completely 100% because sometimes reality is boring. So you kind of have to use your creative liberty in order to enhance your composition. And a way to improve is to look at artists that you like. So here I have 3 artists, American artists that I love, whom I think are masters of lighting, masters of their craft. I especially love Dean Cornwell. If you look at his work, he is very versatile with his lighting. And yeah, a lot of times if you look at these pictures, sometimes light doesn't glow that way. Like on the right with JC Leyendecker, you have a character that's covered in blue color that's not realistic unless you set a stage or colored lights to look like that. So it's really important to take a step back and look at other people's work and use that as inspiration. Let's see. Sorry, not yet. So next I want to just give out book recommendations for everyone. Sorry, I didn't find a picture to put on here, but the first book I want to recommend is Color and Light, a guide for realist painter by James Gurney. If you look at James Gurney on Google, you will be able to find this book. Another book I would recommend is Creative Illustration by Andrew Loomis. This is an old book, but he goes through composition more deeply than this webinar can. There are multiple types of composition, but for me, let me go back to my Clip Studio Paint real quick. I usually just use the rule of third. That's as easy as it can go. You split your painting into third and put your character in third way through the whole painting, right? So if you look at this painting, I put my character in third. So you look at there, and then your eyes will travel around. But Andrew Loomis' book will go more in depth into complex composition. Yeah, I think that is it for my demo today. Another point I forgot to mention is that once you block out a color of a piece, it usually appear a little bit flat, but if you use a gradient on top, like here I just select a color that looks kind of similar to each other, and then I would put a gradient on top and mask that out, and that usually help making it more natural because bounce light hitting the ground, as I said, tends to make some object or the scene in general lighter on the bottom. But I think with that, I'm gonna end my webinar. Are we making good time?
Yes, thank you so much, Lileti. This has been an amazing presentation.
Yeah, thank
Uh,
you.
thank you all who joined us live. And we asked at the beginning from which part of the world were you watching this webinar. So we want to thank you, Isha from Denmark, Sarah from Iran, Suluki from Nigeria, Juan from Mexico, Janina Germany, Mariela also from Germany, Danny from British Columbia, Fenja Germany, Marion Netherlands, South Africa, Dinia, Hungary, Enoch, etc., etc. So thank you so much. So here's more personal about your experience question. For example, from Fenja and Lisa, like at what age did you start doing art? Or how long have you been doing art?
Okay, that's an interesting question because I started drawing when I was real little. It's like just like fan art of a Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura. It's like the stuff that I like. Um, but I never really thought about it seriously until I get into high school, and that's when I get more direction of what I want to do as an artist, and that's when I just kind of want to improve. But I've been drawing for a long time.
Right. Well, just a message from Juan Munoz. Thank you. At this time, I'm really inspired now. I have a lot to try. Really, thank you so much. Another comment from Loki. Appreciate the insight into your composition process. I found the filter tip very useful.
Well, I'm
Um,
glad. That's great.
so, uh, another question, this one from Sunny. How do I properly analyze my favorite artist's light composition techniques, etc.? Do you have a tip for that?
Oh, can you repeat that question, please?
How do I properly analyze my favorite artist's light composition techniques?
Okay. That's actually a great question. I guess you have to be pretty deliberate on what you're looking for in that picture itself. Um, so if let me switch back here. So if you look at Michael Mom, the strength in his work is the lighting. So you would look at what value he used. You could bring it into Clip Studio Paint and put a grayscale on, like what I said. And what you can do is just pick out the colors or the value that he used to see, just to visually see what needs to be done to achieve that kind of contrast and value. And that's what I would suggest doing. A lot of time I would just stare at these painting for a long time and like see if there's any edges that gets blurred and see if the details are realistic or is it more like what the artist trying to convey. You know, sometimes, actually, a lot of time, artists don't draw a whole bunch of detail. It's just an illusion of details. So you need to look at how they render out these little tiny details also. I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Here's another question from John Dillon.
Mhm.
Do you use any texture in your work, or are there texture created by the brushes you use?
Oh, yes. I usually use a round brush from the start. You know, it's just easier to grab my head around. But once I am done with blocking out the values and everything, I usually go in with a more textured brush. These are all brush that I downloaded. I never really make these, but these are all for free. And so I would say go use a textured brush and pick out a lighter color or darker, I guess, and kind of, oh, this is terrible. And go over to give it a little bit more texture, right? So it gives you something to pretty much look at. But I wouldn't worry too much about texture at the beginning of your painting. It's just something I do at the end of mine to give it a little bit more contrast and more things to look at, essentially.
And here's another doubt from Camilo and some other um, users. How do you organize your layers? Do you have like a special organization?
Mm, okay, so recently my workflow has been using a gray scale because I have been more focusing on value, and color I kind of save it for later. Um, and so what I would do usually once you are done with the color thumbnail, I stretch it out to fit my resolution and then put it back on grayscale and start rendering that out. And once I'm done with that, I put on a different layer um, to color. Like, okay, I guess here is the best example. Um, you have the character, you have the background, everything is in grayscale. Usually I would just mask it out and put the character on a different gradient map and then the background on a different gradient map. And that's pretty much my layer structure. It's nothing fancy. And then if I want to fix something, I would just put another layer on top to paint over.
hmm And
Mhm.
because of your 3D background, do you use a lot of the 3D assets from Clip Studio Paint?
Yes. So if you look at, I have a lot of free assets here. Um, yeah, a lot of time these are pretty much available for free, especially the human model, which is the favorite thing I use. Sometimes I can't get the human proportion right in a certain perspective. But as for background, there are a lot of them out there. I have too many on here. I don't organize my stuff very well, as you can see. But uh, yeah, you can find all these crazy background people have on the asset store. Yes, that's what it's called, the asset store. A lot of them are for free as well. So if you can scroll around and see what you like, you can download them or you can surely buy them.
Okay, a question from Delphine. Would you recommend studying 3D modeling?
I wouldn't say you have to focus on it. It definitely helps. It helped for me. Like when I started doing 3D modeling, it really changed how I think about painting. Um, but yes, I would recommend just learning one course, so that you know how 3D works, but you don't really have to get too deep into it. You just it's just a way to help you understand the volume of object. So yes, I would recommend, but no, I would not recommend going full blown 3D. It would take a lot of time.
And here's another question from Sophia. Um, how to start practicing painting in different materials? By the way, I love your work.
Oh, thank you so much. Was that a question? Sorry. I
Yes,
was
a question
like,
and also like a nice compliment. I say, how start to practice painting in different materials?
okay, yeah. I thought at first I heard like, okay, I'm just gonna go practice in different materials. But
But also, PS, I love your work. So there was a
all right.
question and also a
Okay.
greeting.
Yeah. So to practice materials, I would say again, here's when 3D really helps. So if you know how to make a ball in Blender and like just apply different materials for it and get some lighting, um, you can study from that easily. Or you can look at other artists. If you Google material render studies, there are so many artists right there that just draw balls or gummy bears in different materials. Um, Another way I like to do it, because I'm nerdy, is I would just go around, pick up some random object. Like if you have a bracelet, something metallic, you can bring that outside and just look at it for 5 minutes and bring that inside and look at that for another 5 minutes and compare the lighting. That's also a way to learn your observational skill. You don't have to do studies all the time, but for me, it's good to be in that space and wrap my head around it and then apply it to my painting.
And here's another question from Lisa. Do you like working on drawing or animation more?
Mm, I don't like animating. So I tried animation before. It's definitely not for me because for 1 second of animation you have to draw 12 to 24 frames. That's 24 images. And for me as an illustrator, I like rendering little details and I like exploring colors. And so animation, it just does not work for me because you have to simplify so much for animation. But Clip Studio Paint is great at animating. I I tried that before. It's just not for me.
Okay, here's another question from Nano. Considering the lighting of a piece, which would be better, blocking shadow first or light source first?
um, light source. I would say blocking light source first. If anything, I suggest starting from a midtone, because how I understand it is that um, a lot of time objects are always surrounded by ambient light. So imagine you sitting in a room with a window next to you with like a cloudy day, on a cloudy day, you would have ambient light around you. There's no sunlight blasting on your face, but there's sunlight, right? And then after that, you can add the highlights in, and then the shadows are usually where the details are, in my opinion.
Here's another question. What are classes did you take?
Ooh, I took a lot of classes, but if you're starting out, I would suggest schoolism. Um, Schoolism has great courses. Um, a lot of the artists on there are actually masters. They have worked in the animation and game industries for multiple years, probably longer than I have ever lived. And so schoolism is a great way to start. But if you don't have the money, YouTube is also great. I recommend watching Marco Bucci. He kind of breaks down the all the technical stuff into 10 minutes, really bite-sized and easy to understand. But yeah, if you know where to look on YouTube, you can get pretty good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And another question, if you started or if you keep drawing traditionally or painting traditionally.
Oh, like the question asked if I painted traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did a long time ago. I did watercolor at the beginning because cheap. And then later on in my life, I did dabble a little bit in oil painting. I would say oil painting and gouache is like the two medium that's closer to my workflow right now. But yeah, I did do some traditional, but I changed to digital such a long time ago. I don't remember how to do traditional anymore, except for sketching with ink on paper.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the honesty. And another question here, what's your favorite Clip Studio Paint tool or feature?
Ooh, feature. Um, okay. If I have to pick one, it's probably, it's so hard. It's probably the color selection. I use this so much because sometimes there's some details or colors that I don't like, and then that would just help me select a large chunk of the color in my illustration, and I can just airbrush that in real quick. But another one that I really recommend is the perspective tool. I was actually pretty terrible at perspective, but with the perspective tool in Clip, that really helped me improve.
Um, so we are almost reaching the end of our webinar, and here's a long question that maybe will be useful for many from Melissa Alport. Thank you, it's been an amazing It's been amazing. Your work is beautiful. I do have a few questions. One, what's the best tips and advice you will give with someone graduating students wanting to get into the industry, whether concept art or 3D modeling, like where to begin, where to look, and what to put into your portfolio?
That is a long question.
Yeah, it is. But
Yeah.
we
So,
we accept any tips or suggestions.
okay. So in the question, the person said, uh, he's already graduated, or
Yes, is a nearly graduate student.
okay, okay, yeah. I don't recommend art school for everyone. It's not for everyone. I attended art school um, to give me more direction, but nowadays online works as well. Um, Also, school just help with connections and stuff, but if you don't need that, then school is, I would say, 50% irrelevant. And I'm trying to remember what the question was. Tips and tricks. Like I said, I maybe start with YouTube. Start with the resources that I recommend. And I would suggest think about what you want to do in your art career. For me, I want to be freelancing and just doing art prints and illustration, and that's why I do these kind of stuff. But if you want to work as a character artist, for example, you have to make more characters and more diverse um, diverse characters to put in your portfolio. Another thing that I would tell people who are working on their portfolio is that are you looking to join a certain company? Because if you look at, say, Riot, League of Legends, they have a different art style compared to, I don't know, Genshin Impact. That's very anime. So think about what company you want to apply for, or just have a general direction, what you want to, where you want to go with your art, and start from there.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. This has been an amazing webinar. Thank you for those wise words.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this webinar. It's been really fun.
It's been fun and insightful for everyone. So before we go, we just want to share one last bit of information. This webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So please don't forget to subscribe to Clips Paint channel and Graphicsly. You'll receive a notification once the video is available to watch. Also learn more about Clip Studio Paint in our website clipstudio.net/n and graphicsly.com. And to follow Lileti and all of her latest projects, follow her on Instagram as Lileti Art and Twitter Lileti Art, and YouTube Lileti4462, and also her card.co, lileti.card.co. Um, so also thank you all who tagged us in your Instagram stories. So with that, once again, thank you so much, Lileti.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you all who joined us live. Please stay tuned for our coming events. So we hope to see you next time. Bye bye.